Welcome to the Consultants Way podcast, your go-to resource for all things professional services consulting. Brought to you by McMahon and Ransford, a strategy consulting firm with over 30 years of experience helping B2B organizations achieve sustainable growth, and the Consultants Way, the leading comprehensive consultant development program. Hosted by Dean McMahon and Anthony Paluska, we share expert insights, firsthand experiences, and conversations with industry leaders on the topics that interest you most.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of their employer, company, or affiliated organizations.
Welcome back to the Consultants Way podcast. Anthony Paluska, Dean McMahon. Dean, how's it going?
It's going really great. It's going really good.
That's
good.
Know,
we're ending the part of the year I like. We've moved from
the cool weather part of the year,
Texas summer, and that's unfortunate.
Well, we were prepping a little bit behind the scenes, but we were prepping a little bit for this. And like 10 minutes before we started recording, I was calling you. I said, I did something this morning. I threw my daughter on my shoulders. We were running around the house and doing stuff like that before they all left for the day. And I pulled something, did something to my neck. I can't turn my head this way. I can't look this way. I was like, I don't even know if I could look at the camera for this conversation. You're like, don't worry. I got all sorts of bro.
You're worried about looking like the Hunchback of Notre Dame. That's
how I feel. I was on a call earlier and I couldn't lift my head high enough with my eyes. So it's like I was staring up. It was bad, but not the purpose. Hey,
moving to what we're going to do today, what's rich about this, and it's a really good session. What's rich about this is the breadth and depth of experience, seeing everything. Also, I liked the give and take about how important consulting capability is, and the distance between structured, repeatable work and people knowing what to do. And the art of that, I thought, was one of the most meaningful parts of the conversation. In addition, his time having to get his people out of a war and out of disease, but we'll save those for when he comes on to tell us about it.
Yeah. Those are some good teaser kinds of stories. But no, I agree with you. Right. Big theme focuses of this conversation are really around communication and the power that the right kind of communication at the right right time plays in being an effective leader. But the other point that you were touching on is, especially as so much is changing and we're shifting much more of professional services to what we've always been saying professional services should be doing, which is driving outcomes, whether that's as a standalone practice, which obviously we're always on the hook for outcomes if we're a pure play consulting firm, but embedded within large technology or product companies, right? Having an outcome mindset and outcome focus is something we've talked about for years and years, but it really is, the customers are now expecting it in a way that they've never before. And AI is playing a role in our ability to do that, but we have to have people and the culture and the mindset that says, okay, well, what's standard and repeatable so that we can get to an outcome fast versus what needs to be tweaked and tailored specific to this customer situation so that they can overcome their unique challenges to get an outcome. And that balance is something that all consultants have to deal with on a daily basis. And so I thought that was a great conversation. So I agree with you.
Yeah. The journey to better consultants that leverage AI, which we all know is going to shrink the value of just knowing technology. And it's going to shrink the value of just knowing a domain because that information is more available now. But the ability to take a client from point A to point B in an efficient manner, that's the future. So let's get on to hearing from him.
Yep. We'll introduce Mudit Govil right now. So hope everybody enjoys it. Well, hey, Mudit, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Anthony. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for the opportunity of having me.
Yeah, excited to have you. So, look, we're going to dive into the topic really shortly, but before we do that, we'll have provided a little bit of an introduction about you, but please provide the audience with a bit of your background and experience.
Of course. Hello, folks. I have been associated with professional services in the IT industry for a very long time. I spent about 24 years with Oracle and now advising Tata Consultancy Services for their initiatives around Oracle in the healthcare space. Um, Started my professional services journey during the dot-com days, advising a lot of banks about their e-commerce efforts. But after the bust, moved to play a variety of roles within Oracle across the functions of sales, marketing, strategic alliances, before moving back into professional services. And since then, I have executed about 70 enterprise transformations across a variety of products, including the core banking, analytics, billing across multiple countries, with my clients ranging from Australia, New Zealand to the west coast of of the United States, and have been really privy to some of the challenges that clients face while undertaking enterprise transformation. So um, that's that's a quick view of my journey so far.
It's early days. You're a young man, got lots of journey left. Don't worry.
You bet, you bet. Of course. I'm not hanging up my boots anytime soon.
No. You've got lots of experience that you can continue to help out a lot of organizations, and so I want to dive into some of that experience and some of the things that you've seen throughout all of those different enterprise transformations and all of those different things that happen in your career. And the one thing that, as we were talking in advance of this, that was a big topic that you were passionate about and that you've seen lots of examples of is there's a shift going on in how consulting organizations engage with their clients. Can you just talk a little bit about that and your perspective on that?
Yeah, and thank you for asking that question, because I think that shift is going on for some time. Um, we are seeing a lot of winds of change coming in all directions for the professional services. These are the winds of change related to the technological changes, right? We've seen the emergence of and the maturity of the cloud, and onward to SaaS. We have seen the maturity of the integration technologies. We have seen the maturity of the deployment methodologies, moving from on-prem to not on-prem, moving from waterfall to agile, the maturity of the CI/CD pipelines. Uh, all of that has led to change in client expectations. And clients are no longer expecting to be deeply entrenched into the effort of writing detailed business requirements, going through detailed, testing and validation cycles. Uh, they want things fast. They want to leverage the innovation that's in the product, and they want a consumer grade experience in doing all of this. And that also coupled with the fact that we've seen the rise of some of these fully functional platforms. You take Uber as an example, or your BNB as an example. They you are very instantly onboarding yourself onto these platforms at a click of a button. So these are the kind of expectations that have been formed, and even in the enterprise paradigm, the clients are beginning to expect that. So we've seen that shift now from landing up, asking for detailed requirement-based implementation approaches to really ready solution-based onboarding onto the platform, and that's a very profound shift that is already happening, and it's accelerating by the day.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you when I hear you explain all of that, right? I teed this up with right a shift in how organizations are engaging with their clients, but what I heard from you is clients are pushing back on what we traditionally would have called professional services and would have thought in that they want to be able to onboard themselves. They expect it to be faster, to be easier, to be lower cost, right? That sort of thing. But that doesn't necessarily play out in reality, right? Just because they want that doesn't mean that that's the situation that they find themselves in, particularly for these B2B enterprise purchases that they're doing. So, um, how have you seen organizations navigate that pushback while still guiding the client to say, hey, to get the outcomes that you're actually looking for here, there is a role that we play in this process, and essentially selling the value of it in a way that may have been different than how we used to have to do it.
Oh, absolutely. I think the role of the consultants has changed already, and I think the organizations are really stepping up to the challenge that the clients are throwing at them. Uh, the, the role of the consultant has changed from being an implementation labor to really an outcome accelerators, to be their trusted advisors to the client, and you know few things that the organizations have been doing, including mine, is to really start with the change in mindset. I think the mindset of the people that are interacting with the client have to change themselves. They have to move away from this mentality of saying, "Okay, give me your detailed requirements, and I'll try to configure the system according to that." I think they need uh, they are becoming intelligent about the client business itself. Um, there are hiring of consultants from the client organizations who are as intelligent, who speak the industry syntax, who understand the challenges, the pain points, and who understand what is the outcome the client is seeking. So a lot of shift is happening from that standpoint, and accordingly, even the other consultants are getting trained on more and more on the domain of the client. So that is one change that the organizations are making. The second one that you're seeing is that there's a lot of investment going in building assets, the artifacts that are needed. So one of the approaches that we took was to build some of the detailed level 3 process maps of the processes that will get automated. These are end-to-end process maps that we created. We created detailed configuration workbooks. We created detailed foundation design documents. We created pre-configured components, so that when you are starting a project, you're not starting from ground zero. Okay, give me your requirements, but you're starting with a system that is already 40 to 50% ready to start the configurations with, and then you are building on top of that. So that is the second thing. And the third thing is, you take an incremental approach to build. You're not waiting for 12 to 18 months for this big enterprise application to go live, but you're starting with what I call as minimum viable product, the MVP. And you start with either the most burning problem that you can solve, or a most manageable problem that you can solve, uh, and try to go live with that first, and then continue to build on top of that. So it becomes a more incremental approach. It minimizes the risk and it fast tracks your time to market. So let me give you an example. In our organization, we used to have about 12 to 18 months of go live timeframes. But when we switched over to this methodology, we started going live with our MVPs within 100 days. That was a big shift that we brought in terms of deploying our products. And I think the client expectation is now moving to see something happening in 100 hours. So the the uh, the effort doesn't stop right there. I think we just have to continue to reinvent ourselves.
I love the incremental implementation strategy, but I want to go back on something you said earlier, which was we're bringing in domain expertise, and we already have the technical expertise and the technical expertise. But there's a whole area that we see all the time, which is consulting capability. Just because I know pharmaceuticals or I know my software doesn't mean I can lead a client and manage them to success. So, what do you see the requirements on us to be much more consultative in today's environment?
Yeah, let me think about that. So, are you saying that just because we are going to bring domain experts who are people from the industry, that would not ensure the success of the transformation? Is that that
Yeah,
alone
yeah,
would not
because
suffice?
the
Yeah.
there's we always think there's three components of knowledge. One is domain, one is technology, but the other is how to be a consultant. how to talk to executives, how to anticipate problems. And domain people don't know that by nature. Tech people don't know that by nature. So my question was, as we become outcome focused, we also have to be consultant capability, which you obviously have in abundance, but that doesn't mean the average person we bring into an Oracle or whatever has that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's where the role of training and preparing your team becomes very important, because uh, what ensures success, let's talk about it for a minute, is really your ability to be predictable, to tread the beaten path where you've done it already many times before. And I think that's where the critical difference comes in, because we as consultants do transformation for a living, where as the clients would do it once or twice in their life. So we have to encapsulate that experience into methodologies, into frameworks, into tools, into capabilities that are repeatable, standard, and automation driven. And and that's how, armed with all these tools and capabilities, is when we start talking to the client, looking at their business problems. We have people who understand those business problems intimately, but then we have these consultants who are equipped with these standard tools and methodologies to really deliver the change that the clients are seeking. So it's just not enough to say that just because we've got the domain people into the organization, now things will remain hunky dory. I agree with you there, Dean. I think we have to equip our people with a lot of capabilities, the tools, the methodologies, and the models to really make it an outcome based.
Yeah, yeah, and just because we know what to do, or just because an individual knows what to do and knows how to do it, doesn't mean that they can guide a client through seeing that outcome and getting to the end state that was promised in the sales process or was promised somewhere along that journey. And so that's where these skills that you guys are talking about here really come into play. What have you seen work really well in terms of helping people to either develop these skills or to incorporate them into their regular behaviors? Because more and more commonly we're asking a bigger subset of our team to be able to do these things, rather than just saying, hey, we're going to call in the 2 or 3 experts that know how to drive organizational transformation. No, we need everybody that is thinking about the project and working on the project to have that same mindset and that same skill set. Have you seen anything work particularly well, other than, right, just finding good role models within the organization to learn from?
No, I think more than that, right? The change of mindset doesn't come, instantly. I think you have to be at it day after day after day. So, during all of my interactions, during all my weekly meetings with my team, I continue to emphasize on that. So, you have to really identify the champions who are more flexible, more adaptive, more capable of thinking differently. So you create those champions, and then you create teams under them, and and then you provide them the training that they need on these tools and methodologies. And then every time you speak to them, you have to continue to reemphasize, reinforce that we are in a different paradigm now. We are not in the requirements driven approach paradigm. We are in a solution driven approach paradigm. We are in a platform paradigm, and you just need to continue to hammer this day in and day out. And I can tell you, it was easier for us to create those models and methodologies and tools. It was, or has been, very hard for us to create that change of mindset. But you just have to stay at it.
Yeah, the leader matters a lot in that, and then taking bite-sized, manageable steps in the right direction becomes really important. But I completely agree. The big gap when we see organizations struggling to make that journey is the expectations are not reinforced on a regular basis. I was with a group last week, and we did a couple of day workshop. They've been a professional services team embedded in a large product company, and they've been doing consulting type services for years and years now. but they had a bunch of subject matter experts in there that knew how to come in and could solve problems here and problems there. The where they're headed is, and you talked about PS teams are becoming outcome accelerants or accelerators. That's really the direction they're shifted, right? They're going to own more bigger outcomes and take more of a stake in owning those outcomes as a business. And so we sat down to try and figure out, well, what does our talent needs look like? What does the future state? Where should we be hiring from? Does it change the skill mix and profile that we need? And we left that room with this recognition that actually one of the biggest things that has to change is we have to reward the behavior and motivate the behavior, and then of course train and develop on the behavior of the consulting skills, not the you're the expert at this particular topic, because that's where we run into traps. That doesn't scale as effectively as having experts complemented by a bunch of advisors, essentially. And that's a big mindset shift for a lot of organizations. It was for this group, and it will be as they go through this journey of trying to bring their team along that. So it's great that you called that out here. Maybe you have got an example or two of when you took organizations through that. And I mean, you said you reinforced it on a regular basis, but were there people that stood out to you? I mean, what maybe get a little bit more tactical, right? How would a leader like yourself try and make that a reality even more so?
Yeah, I think you have to start with self, right? You have to really embrace that new approach yourself, and transform yourself first into somebody who begins to think and talk about it all the time. And the second thing is, as I said, you need to really identify the talent, which I did. I had to literally restructure and reorganize the team, because some of the folks that were, leading some of these client engagements were not attuned to thinking differently. So restructuring the team was another immediate thing that I had to do. Then I reorganized the team along the process areas, where deep process knowledge and skills in specific areas is kind of concentrated, so that we are not having very generalist approach, and we are continuing to build deeper and deeper knowledge base in that particular process areas. So and then we started building these capabilities that I have been talking of, which allowed us to change the entire approach. So you just need to make sure that you're not only talking about it, you're also ensuring that you're matching the requirement of the today's market with the people who have the ability to learn, and then give them the tools and methodologies necessary to execute on the job. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like almost anything else, right? The team embodies the personality and the behaviors and the philosophy of the leader, right? And leaders could be hierarchical leaders in terms of that's my manager, or it could be leaders and role models on the team of those that they see as performing well, right? If somebody shows up early and works harder and does these, right, it drives this cultural change in the team and the mindset change of the team. Um, I want to shift gears a little bit, right? And I want to keep coming back to this term of PS becoming this outcome accelerator. What are the some of the other things that are going on right now, and how do they fit into that? Because I hear a lot, right? AI plays a big role, right? The introduction of AI as our delivery enhancer could play a role in outcome accelerator. This you mentioned this a little bit before. This shift, from more custom work to more standardized. How can we standardize 80% of what we do so that we can be a little bit more efficient? We have the forward deployed engineer model. We've got a bunch of these different things going on right now that seem like they're all shooting for a similar goal, which is outcomes are the primary focus. We're going to organize ourselves that way, measure ourselves that way, deploy our strategy that way. But there's lots of different pieces, and some are working, some aren't. So if you don't mind, unpack the other things that are going on right now in the market, probably first of all with AI's role in trying to help accelerate outcomes that we can deliver.
Oh, definitely. And thank you for that. we are in a very interesting spot right now. Where when we look at the spectrum of standardization on one side and customization on the other side, uh, given the emergence of AI, the maturity of the cloud technologies, the evolution of these SaaS models, we are seeing that we are moving to the extreme end of this spectrum at the same time. Whereas we are following more and more standardized approaches, armed with standardized tools, methodologies, automation to have more predictable outcomes. Uh, on the other hand, the very same technologies are also allowing people to be completely customized. Um, and let me explain. The way I am seeing this evolving is where the organization are tasked with transforming their non-differentiated processes, which I would say, the accounting piece, the HR, or the CRM. The processes themselves are not very differentiated from organization to organization. We'll see a shift more and more towards standardization. But when the organizations are dealing with uh, something that helps them differentiate in the marketplace. It could be their pricing model. It could be their risk management strategies. Uh, we are going to see that the move will be towards customizations because the standardized application software, which forces them to adapt to the software, doesn't work, especially for some of the large organizations. And we are already beginning to see that change with Palantir coming up with this forward deployed engineering model where the engineers are going and building the product sitting right next to the client, because these are high value mission critical engagements or applications that they need to build, and cost is not really that big a consideration because this is your secret sauce of success that you're working on. So we are going to see that dichotomy becoming more and more crystallized, that at the same time we will have certain areas where the standardization related approach will be taken, whereas there'll be few other areas where a more differentiated approach will be taken. But as a professional services organization, as I continue to say, that we have to move and reinvent ourselves from being generalists to becoming more and more specialists. And as we reinvent ourselves, I think we will do well on both these end of the spectrum.
Yeah. Efficiency is not only about how do we standardize and make everything as repeatable as possible. To your point, it's finding out what those automated, repeatable, or automatable, repeatable tasks that exist in our workflow, and making sure that we offload as much of that as possible, and then retain the secret sauce, so to speak, of our capabilities and the flexibility to deliver and do what's right for the client, and living in that kind of that gray area between repeatability as much as possible, because we're all managed and measured based on profitability of our engagements and our utilization and all of these other things, and we're measured on client outcomes and satisfaction and our ability to actually drive success. That dichotomy is something like a consultant, professional service, always has to keep in mind, which is unique, and depending on an individual's background coming into a team, or depending on the pressure on that team at any given point in time, it could be tough to strike that balance to say I'm working with this client on this thing, or I'm solving this problem for my team. Like, do I standardize? Do I do the more bespoke offering? What's the sweet spot? And every firm and every PS org seems to have to find their own sweet spot there in the middle of like what's the right balance for us and for our business. You see it the same way?
Yes, absolutely. As I said, we are going to become more and more specialized. So you need to really define the focus that you want to take as a professional services organization as to which end of the spectrum you want to really, really play in.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I want to make sure that we cover a couple of other things. So you've gone through a bunch of different experiences throughout your career, and in having some of these conversations, getting to know you a little bit on this topic, you've had some very unique situations that you've had to lead and manage a team through. And when I hear you explain these, I always think there's something that everyone could take away from this, even if they don't find themselves in a situation that's quite as extreme or intense as the ones that you'll describe here. So I don't want to tell your story for you. So if you don't mind,
No,
dive
they're plain frightening.
in. That yes, yes. So
Yeah,
please.
actually, what people don't know is he's only 25, and look what's
Yeah.
happened in his experiences.
Yeah, please share one or two of these examples, because you have more stories on this topic than
Then
many
you should.
groups of people have.
Then you should have.
Yeah. So please pick your favorite one or two there, and let's try and tie a thread between those in terms of some takeaways for other leaders managing through crisis.
Sure. No, and thank you for bringing that up because a couple of situations which were quite something that I wasn't prepared for. Um, and these had nothing to do with challenges on the project and clients getting upset, escalations happening. These were things that were completely out of my control or anybody's control. And I'll give you two examples. One one happened. Both actually happened in African continent. One happened in the West Africa region where the Ebola broke out, and this was almost a decade ago. But and we are beginning to see the emergence of Ebola all over again. If you've been tracking the news lately, but uh, at that point of time, it was such an infectious disease. I had about 25, 30 consultants operating in Nigeria. And, our biggest challenge was, what do we do? Because they were all working on mission critical business transformations. The clients were quite keen that we continue. The consultants themselves were fearful to stay back. Their families were even more fearful. Uh, the challenge was you couldn't pull anybody out because the biggest risk you can get infected is while traveling. So it was a balancing act that I had to play in managing the client expectation, managing the team, trying to comfort them, providing them the necessary support from our organization to continue to stay there, and then also working and talking to their families to give them the comfort and telling them that this is probably the safest strategy for them to stay back in a very isolated environment, uh, and be there rather than trying to make a travel. And then a similar situation which happened was so just to summarize that, so containment was the approach that I took over there. And the other situation that I faced was again in Egypt, this time moving to the east side of the continent, where the Egypt revolution broke. And again I had about 15 to 20 consultants based in Egypt, and they were suddenly, all over CNN, there were news about bullets flying over, bombs exploding, some very close to where my team was there. And again, similar challenges of managing the team, managing their families, managing stakeholders, managing clients. Uh, but this time, it was very evident to us that there's going to be no isolation. Bullets are not going to wait for seeing people where they are living or not living, and we need to extract our team. So we took the help of our global security team and we extracted them out. Um, but then the clients were as soon as things started to quieten down, wanted the project to keep going. And not everybody was ready to travel back, so we came up at that time. It's almost more than a decade ago. VPNs were still not very stable in that part of the world, but we still created specific VPN tunnels. to see if we can continue to, access and deploy our solution remotely. So we came up with some of that innovation in, having a larger bandwidth VPN tunnels into those markets, and started deploying in a remote manner where that was never tried before.
There's a book here that you should write, Ebola and War, Consulting 101. That's it. Wait. Ebola and War, Consulting 101, right? Yeah, if you're going to, hey, listen, first of all, we love having you here. We're going to have you back because there's so much richness in your experiences. But if you were going to talk to someone who was taking a global job like you've had, what's a piece of advice you would give them?
Yeah. So I think there are 3 or 4 things I would like to say. Number one, change is inevitable, right? You not only have to embrace the change, but you have to anticipate the change and be flexible and prepared for it. So that'll be number one. Number two would be, and it may sound cliched, but it is more true than ever. People are your biggest assets. If you take care of your people, they will help you succeed even in adverse circumstances. As I just told you, the situation of Ebola and Egypt revolution. Kudos to those people, who decided to stay back and continue to work, and who, battled the bullets to get out. So that'll be number two. Number three would be execution is everything. Create robust, resilient delivery models and execute with discipline. Because if you cannot execute, you cannot succeed. And number four would be, practice what I call as SAR, SAR, which means standardize, automate, and reuse what you can, because it will help you drive efficiencies. And I know, Anthony, you said something about that. I would say that is a very important thing. That how do you drive efficiency? How do you reduce the time frames? How do you reduce the effort? So do that. And finally, what I have practiced is a principle I call OATS. Again, an acronym, OATS. What it stands for is ownership, accountability, trust, and transparency, and sensitivity. You have to own the job that you're taking. The buck stops with you. It doesn't go anywhere. Nobody else is to be blamed. Nobody else has to be, responsible for that ownership. You own the job. Be accountable for the outcome. My principle has been the success is accountable to my team. Failure is accountable to me. I'm responsible for the failure. So anytime any escalations happen, it's not my team that goes and faces the client. I go there. So I have followed that principle. The third is the trust and transparency you have to establish with your clients, with your teams, with your stakeholders, and be transparent with them. I think people are open to understanding the challenges you face as long as you tell them how and what you're doing to overcome those challenges. And finally, be sensitive. Be sensitive to the situation that you are in. Be sensitive to the circumstances of the person that you're dealing with. Again, whether it's a client or your team member, but do practice both all the time.
Yeah, no, I like those, right? Especially all of that around communication, the transparency, proactive, and empathetic communication to everybody that's involved in that process, right? To the point, bad news doesn't age well whether you're explaining that to an employee or to a client or to anybody like that in the process. So your philosophy behind, right, you feel like the sense of ownership of making sure that the right message and the message gets communicated as soon as you're able to do so. That served you well in your crises examples that you explained, as well as has served you well in other aspects of your career, I'm sure. So, but thank you so much for the time, and thanks for joining and sharing some of your insights and your experience with the audience, and look forward to doing this again.
Looking forward to it, and thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks. Well, Well, I hope everybody enjoyed that great conversation with Mudit. I think we covered a lot of great topics. We did spend a lot of time on the talent needs and how much that's changing all the time. I alluded to some examples that we were working with recently, but that is the problem we solve every day over at the Consultant's Way. So if that's a challenge that you're dealing with, or your organization is going through something like that, I encourage you to check it out at consultantsway.com and see what we're all about there. If you just enjoy the podcast and aren't interested in all of that right now, that's fine too. You can always subscribe to hear more of these on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. If you want to reach out to Dean or myself with questions or with suggestions on future guests or topics, find us on our LinkedIn page, or you can always email the show at podcast@consultantsway.com. Looking forward to hearing from everybody, and we'll see you next time.